Scott, this is KantBot. You're on the official TekWars Fan Network podcast.
Welcome.
This is Warren with KantBot, and we're going to be talking to Scott Greer today. He's a former conservative journalist. He wrote for the Daily Caller. He's a well-known entity. He's a controversial guy. He's been involved in a few scraps and scrabbles. So we're going to get into some business with him today. First of all, I guess I should ask the question on everyone's mind, Scott. Sliders, Sequest, Lex, Stargate, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. What's your preference here?
I think I watched Sliders as a kid, so I'd probably say, and you didn't have Star Wars there, so I guess I'd say Sliders.
Yes, Sliders is a real classic. I love the one where they go to like the Jurassic Park timeline. That was a great one. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the show. It's a 90s classic. I wouldn't include Star Wars on there.
I feel very out of touch because I'm not familiar with Sliders.
Oh, Sliders was a great show about a guy who had a quantum device that allowed him to travel between alternate timelines.
Huh.
Scott knows what I'm talking about.
It's very TekWars sounding.
All I remember is watching the show, but I can't actually remember any like themes or episodes. All I remember is watching it as a kid, but I can't remember any episodes. But I enjoyed it as a kid, so I would, based on just that sentiment that I liked it, I would just go with Sliders.
Okay, that's good enough for us. That's a respectable opinion. We haven't had a Sliders fan on before, but let me get into some of your recent history here. There's been a lot going on with Rosie Gray and a whole thing with you, and you are probably most in people's minds these days for your spat with those kinds of people and your dismissal from the Daily Caller.
Yeah.
And you've really been feuding with your former editor a lot. You've been trolling him, I've seen. I've been enjoying that.
Eric Owens, yes. Two things to come up with there is I was not actually dismissed by the Caller. I had already left the Caller prior to the Atlantic docs a few months prior. I mean, they did disavow me, and they would definitely not publish me again, but I was not fired or by the Caller at the time because I was not working there. I was just like publishing like an article whenever I felt like there. But Eric Owens, he wasn't technically my superior, but he would edit my articles. Like usually I was a late night editor and I had nobody to edit him. So I'd be like, Eric Owens like stays up till like 3. He's got a weird timeline. I mean, he's like a stay-at-home dad and his wife works. So he would just like write for the Daily Caller for fun, and his specialty was teacher sex stories. So he'd always have like a story like smoking hot 27-year-old victimizes 16-year-old repeatedly with oral sex and striptease or something like that. So those were the stories that were specialty. But he was a good writer, but he had really cucked politics. Like he hated Trump from the beginning. He was always big fan of immigration and all the really dumb conservative ink stuff, like, oh, free markets will solve everything and everything like that. But yeah, he's kind of a crazy guy. So he would, I guess I didn't really notice him since my docs or really thought about him, but I noticed when
you were doxxed for writing for one of Richard Spencer's former publications.
Yeah, Radix. I used to write for Radix for like a year, from like March 2014 to like June 2015, something like that. So yeah, I used to write for that, and that's what I had a pseudonym for that. And Katie McHugh had like some old G chat proving that was my pseudonym, and she was able to find that and give it to Rosie Gray, and the rest is in the Atlantic and BuzzFeed. So,
do you think you were the target of that for a specific reason, or do you think it was just somebody? She happened to have that. It happened to be you, and they just wanted whoever.
It was targeted for a specific reason. I mean, Katie McHugh was very bitter about how her career went. I mean, after 2017, she was fired from Breitbart for that tweet saying, like, if the UK didn't have Muslims, they wouldn't have terror attacks. It was, whatever. It's probably fairly true. And, Breitbart's reputation would think that they would love kind of opinions, but they fired her for it. But there were some other problems with her at Breitbart from people told me. But after that, a lot of people tried to help her, but, she didn't really land anywhere and she kept bouncing around from jobs. And I think her health worsened at the time. And she eventually was like a part-time waitress, I think last summer was her job. And she just felt very bitter at other people who were still able to have careers in spite of having, politically incorrect views. So she wanted to target those people, specifically me. And also, I think her roommate, P.T. Carlo, was also directing her against me for weird personal reasons. So I don't think she wanted to take down a lot of people, but the two people that she was able to give up to Rosie Gray at the time were the so-called most important people, which was Ian Smith, who used to work for the Department of Homeland Security, and then me. Those are the people that made the most news to say, like, oh, I have all these emails and writings, secret writings they have, and that would justify, an entire article about these people. I mean, most of the people she had dirt on, nobody cares about. So that's why I was targeted by her. And it's also to satisfy her own resentment that, some of these people were, still able to write for conservative outlets. And she, due to how her, life progressed after she was fired, she was not able to do that. But she wanted to take down people. And then she was able to convince herself that, oh, I'm helping, clean the right of racists because these Catholics tell me that if I fight against the racists, they'll give me a career back. And
yeah, so this is the crazy part of it is that, so in exchange for this information, Katie got like a profile written about her by Rosie Gray that was, about how she was corrupted and about how now she reads St. Augustine. And now, so she's okay now, or she's in her redemption arc.
Is this the fellow who was, she had the BuzzFeed expose about how she was corrupted by the alt-right, or am I misinterpreting?
Yeah, and this is something we were talking about with Sean and Logo earlier in the week. Yeah. Was sort of the whole purpose of Rosie Gray's piece was to concoct this kind of narrative of the path, the forbidden path. Mm-hmm. And you start out and you read like Jordan Peterson or whatever, and then you become you are driven along this, and you can't ever go back, and ultimately you're going to end up a super racist white nationalist KKK, and that you go step by step, and it's inexorable.
Yeah, and I definitely got that part, and she definitely tracked that course. And a lot of, even though a lot of her conservative, like the only people who really kind of believed her story were conservatives, particularly Catholic conservatives who fell for the Augustine ruse. I have to say, I don't think she ever read City of God, and as when I knew her, she never attended mass or went to confession or showed any sign of religious devotion. Her saying that like she was a devout Catholic in the story is just a way to make herself look better in the eyes of people she's trying to appeal to. I don't remember for the time I knew her, ever being like that, or ever being a big fan of Augustine, or somehow City of God convincing you not to like pagans or something like that. But yeah, her story was saying, Rosie Gray's intention was showing that like this conservative pipeline of taking young people from colleges and, seeing if they have any talent and then taking them to DC, and then that they get further radicalized by the social circles in DC and also conservative media's own, business models of wanting to have stories for its Trump voting readership makes people become more extreme, and that we need to do something about this. And look at the life it ruined. And this poor woman, Katie McHugh, who is now very gaunt now, as that word was thrown around throughout the BuzzFeed articles, that she's very gaunt, and it's all because of racist white men and conservative media that she's like this.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, we can shit on Katie. I feel like she's just like a pawn in this.
Yeah,
I don't really care much about her personally. I can understand what she is trying to do now. You know, she's just trying to take care of herself. So there's only so much you can say about that. But what I am interested in is definitely how it's people like Rosie Gray and her, compatriots that sort of are the ones who set out this path. And it's almost like they want people to follow it in order to create the news that they want.
Yeah. Yeah, and they definitely, well, that's all the kind of journalism. One thing about Rosie Gray is, I know that a lot of people have problems with her, is that in some ways she's, the way she wrote the article is much better than some of the Antifa journalists who would write that, like people at HuffPost and Daily Beast and Vice and stuff like that, the like professional alt-right beat reporters who, when they write, they just try to claim that like these people are inspiring violence every time they tweet. They're also the worst people on planet Earth. Like if I was described by like some of these people at Huffington Post, it would be like I'm just the worst person on Earth. And anytime I tweet a meme, it's may send somebody to do a mass shooting.
It's going to get somebody killed.
Yeah, that's what they try to, and then they'll tie what I'm tweeting to somehow that's similar. Ben Shapiro is also inspiring violence, and also like Sean Hannity. So they try to make those connections. So Rosie Gray follows in the model that a lot of journalists have, but it's not as, I would say, as obviously outrageous as some of the stuff you would see in, say, like HuffPost and Vice. But she certainly shaped the story for Katie to make her narrative. I mean, she didn't really care. I mean, she got Katie to agree to this article based on the delusion that she would be able to rehabilitate her career. But clearly that articles didn't do that. And even in the end of the article, it's like, oh, she probably still is like not acceptable for polite society, but oh well, I got this story out of it.
Yeah.
I still got to demonstrate my message, and that's what's the important part of this. And her life is just a way for me to get a point, to get across my political point, and to say that all these conservative movement has an extremist problem that they need to clean up, and we need to and your life is going to be terrible if you get involved in this, and you really need to get out while you can, as the main article's message is get out while you can. Mm-hmm. Your life won't improve, and we won't give you a second chance, but get out while you can anyway.
And this is what really strikes me about it, is that it's a very materialist kind of way of looking at the world, where this speech is impacting people and making them do things. It's like the old thing, like satanic panic. We have to put the parental warning sticker on the rap CDs. We have to ban Dungeons and Dragons because it's going to make people do evil things. And we generally reject that in our country when it applies to all these other things. But now the existence of someone on Daily Caller or Breitbart or whatever who is critical of the liberal worldview is that they're going to make people commit violence somehow with words, and that people are being brainwashed. That's a very kind of anti-human, anti-freedom way of looking at things.
Yeah, and it assumes that these people have no agency. They did a similar, Katie is in her 20s, so she definitely made her decision. And when they were doing the satanic panic stuff and PMRC stuff in the 80s, I mean, I guess they had a point that this is like 14-year-olds listening to heavy metal music or Dungeons and Dragons, and you're a little bit more impressionable at 14, and even under a legal system, we assume you don't have. We shouldn't hold you fully responsible for your actions. But when you're in your 20s, mid 20s, it's a little bit different. But they definitely done this before with other people. There was that recent Maniacs last week that BuzzFeed had that article about those people who drew that swastika. I think it was in Indiana or something, some Midwestern state. They drew a swastika on a synagogue, and BuzzFeed decided not to just focus on these individual lunatics. They decided, how do these people get radicalized? And then they blame like Ben Shapiro, Identity Europa, and like all these other people, and they're like, these are the people who are responsible for this. And it assumes these people don't have agency at all. It's just like you're, 20 years old and somehow your mind gets brainwashed by these evil right-wing YouTubers to go do something stupid. And then a lot of these people clearly, I don't know how Ben Shapiro could be blamed for a swastika on a synagogue, but
well,
they will make that connection whether they, however they want to.
Didn't one of his boys, that guy Kyle,
Kashub,
yeah. He
was caught when he was 16 years old saying the N-word and private chat, which Shapiro has not made note on it. Their strategy for that is just to ignore it, and then just like Kashub, slowly but surely entered the public limelight again, and they hope that people have forgotten that. Which they give him a second chance, but they won't give others a second chance for depending on how useful they are. But back to the point, the reason why the media wants to do that and show that they don't have agency is because they want to take out the important people. They want to take out the sinners of radicalism that are corrupting these people. I mean, they understand that somebody like Katie or these lunatics in Indiana, they have agency. They're responsible for their own actions, but they want to present them as kind of these drones that somehow had no idea what they were doing, and that the real responsibility are these bigger right-wing figures who we need to censor and take off YouTube and Twitter and exercise them from polite society.
And a lot's been going on with Steven Crowder right now.
He just got demonetized, I believe.
Yeah. For making fun of a journalist for calling him gay in his videos, which is true.
Yeah.
I guess you can't point that out.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, this is the fun of things. Is it not? You can't get anywhere unless you're feuding with people. So people on both sides, they want all this shit to happen. It's what, drives their accounts and brings them views for things. So to then turn around and like seriously bitch at people for like participating with you in that, even though you both know that it's just a game.
It's chess. Yeah. Do you think these people actually believe this, Scott? Do you think these rosy gray types, do you think they actually believe the things that they're saying, or do you think they know that they're concocting a kind of strategy?
Rosie Gray has a strategy. I think she believes what she's right. I think the people at, I think the Antifa journalists don't believe, but they know it's just pure strategy. I mean, they'll, the way they connect stuff and do outrageous things is just, they know they're doing a strategy and they're doing it purposely to,
they're very Leninist.
Yeah, it's like that HuffPost article, I think that was published last week, on like Twitter still has a white nationalist problem. Here are all the white nationalists on there that Twitter needs to ban. I mean, the point of that is, it includes like a Republican congressman and a lot of people who are definitely not white nationalists. I mean, like I'm included in there for some reason. I mean, like Lauren Southern, all these people are included in this list. And the point of that list is to say, it doesn't matter if these people are actually white nationalists or whatever their connections. The point is like, hey, Twitter, here's a list of people you need to ban. And we're going to keep tweeting this and posting this list. in the hopes that you'll follow our rules and instructions. I'm pretty sure, a lot of these reporters, whether they believe it or not, they don't care. They know that they see their journalism as activism and it's pushing a larger point. I think Rosie's main objective is to advance her own career. Right. I don't see her as necessarily as activist driven as somebody like Jared Holt or somebody like that. I think she's a little bit more just trying to make a career in journalism and have influence. She's definitely a liberal and she wants to promote a kind of a liberal view, but I don't think it's as aggressive and as necessarily dishonest as some of the other as the Antifa journalists. But whether they believe it or not is I think some of them know that like claiming that like some like that Canadian academic who's written for right-wing public Ricardo Duchesne. I don't think they know that this guy is not promoting violence, and all of his writings are like so arcane and scholarly that they're definitely not leading to angry white men. But they want to say that this guy is inspiring violence and terrorism just so they can ruin his life.
And it seems to be generally all about in the same way that someone like Rosie Greer wants to advance her career.
Greer, oh no!
in the same way.
Oh, that is a scary.
That would be beautiful. That would be beautiful. I think that sometimes stuff leads up to that. I mean, you guys can act like you hate each other, but maybe someday.
One day. It's meant to be.
But for someone like Rosie Gray, she, in the same way that she wants to promote her career, I feel like the media overall wants to promote its narrative because that narrative gives it monopoly power over the ability to make narratives about this kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah. That's definitely true when it comes to social media censorship. I mean, this is primarily not really driven by the tech companies themselves. They're responding to journos complaining about this nonstop. I mean, this is entirely journal-driven, as we're seeing now in real time with Steven Crowder and this Vox reporter. And this Vox reporter is single-handedly responsible for, this latest round of purges for YouTube. And they're doing this just to placate him and his defenders. They're just doing this to placate the journalists. And they're still not appeased by this. But journalists want this power. They want, they don't, a bunch of Vox reporters today who are planning to go on strike. I don't know what a Vox blogger strike would look like, but they're complaining about their low wages. They may have low wages. They probably make like 100th of what your average Facebook engineer makes, but they still have more power and influence over that Facebook engineer, and they can tell him what to do. And I mean, and they're definitely controlling the narrative, but they are able to set, the standards that big tech live by, and big tech is, is getting browbeaten into submission. As we see with YouTube, as we see with Facebook, Facebook was the most hardest hit by journalists' coverage, both for the claim that they're allowing right-wing extremism on there, and also the fact that Russia was able to buy a few $1,000s worth of crappy ads that influenced nobody, but that with just that narrative that Russia was able to influence the election due to their ability to buy ads on Facebook has led to, free speech being undermined in our country, and all of these new standards that Facebook has that make it in a format that very few people can exist on if they have any controversial views. And that's entirely due to journalists.
So let me ask you this. We have our ability to, each one of us, look at all the data that comes in every day, all the news stories, the facts of things, and we all have our ability to sort of make up our own narrative about what's going on in the world and what the significance of these events are. Do you think it's inherently dangerous to allow people that freedom? Let's say that a few of those people, a very small percentage, are going to become anti-Semitic. They're going to become Holocaust deniers. They're going to become radicalized terrorists of some kind, a very small percentage. Do you think that stopping that is more important than, allowing everyone to be able to have the power to make their own narrative without accepting the media's?
Yeah, I don't think that really is a threat at all. And I mean, people have, what the greatness of the internet is that it allowed people the freedom to to seek out new knowledge and find things that they would have never found before. I think, for my example, I probably would have never discovered a lot of the music I listen to without the internet. And I think a lot of people can share that. And it's also like movies, books, ideas that people would have never known about the internet. The internet has presented freedom of knowledge and information that has given people that I think a lot of people have enjoyed and has made the internet a worthwhile place to spend all our time on now. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. But I think these criticisms that we have to censor all this information because some people may, take on dangerous attitudes is just nonsense. I mean, we've always had these problems of people going crazy and doing mass shootings. Just look at the Columbine shooters. I don't think they were driven by any political ideology, yet they were just driven by their own, personal failings. And I think one of them was a total sociopath who convinced, I think it was Eric Harris, who was the sociopath who convinced the other one to commit this horrible shooting. You're always going to have these crazy people going to latch on to, for whatever reason, to go out and kill or to do bad things or have crazy thoughts. But we've always had, in America, we've always stressed the importance of the First Amendment. So by these tech companies censoring these people for promoting bad thoughts, that would be like saying you can't put your newspaper out in, the town square or whatever, because, that might lead to dangerous thoughts. And whether these companies like it or not, they are the town squares of our time. If you're not allowed on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or anywhere, I mean, your voice is effectively silenced. Like, you don't really have free speech. I mean, yeah, you can go on a street corner and yell, but what does that matter? I mean, it'd be like saying we argue at a time when, telephones were, the pre-internet age, you couldn't be able to use a telephone if you had dangerous thoughts because, you might spread those ideas. But we're like, oh, you still have free speech. You
shouldn't be allowed to write.
Yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't be allowed to have a typewriter. And we're getting very close to that point. They are trying to kick off Laura Loomer and Milo from Telegram, which then would just leave them with text message, and then they would still complain like, I just received a text message.
Yeah, you can do a group text message.
Yeah. Yeah, but journals would still complain that like Milo was able to use iOS. So he needs to get kicked off. He needs to not be allowed to have an iPhone in general. He just has to use a landline. That's the only way he can communicate. And I mean, we're not very far off from that standard. And so these tech platforms, the real threat that they claim by, right-wing extremism is it's grossly exaggerated. I mean, whenever they try to say that, right-wing extremism is a greater threat than Islamic extremism, that's just silly. That only makes sense if you stay remotely focused on America. But if you encompass the entire world, Islamic terror groups have, large shares of territory in Africa and Asia, and are committing, horrific acts of violence on a daily basis.
Do you think that ISIS and other groups like that should be banned by Facebook?
Well, they already are.
But would you support them on the same grounds?
They're a criminal terrorist organization. So yeah, I think if they set the standard that like we're not going to let terrorist organizations use that. So if there was like a right-wing, militia or something that was designated a terror group and that was responsible for like bombing, like it would be the same. Like, you don't want the real IRA on necessarily on Facebook, like showing off like hey, we're building bombs again, check it out. You know, you don't necessarily, if it's a group that's calling for violence and is involved in violence, then
But then
you know, and
you
criminal
run into
acts.
that problem then with like the SPLC would say that, you know, all of us are a white ring terror group. I mean, how do you mitigate that? Who
Well, it's
gets
pretty
to
easy. I
decide?
mean, it's also it's based on like whether these people are actually advocating violence. I mean, Facebook has banned Jared Taylor from Facebook, and I'm not sure at any point in his career he's ever advocated for violence. And it takes a very highbrow tone. It's always very polite and civil. I don't know how, and they banned him for, you know, both Twitter and Facebook have banned him for saying that he's promoting violence, which he's not promoting violence. I mean, you're very clear of who people are, who is and who is not promoting violence. And also, social media platforms are hypocritical about this because they have Antifa groups that offer like terrorist training manuals. Like I think Redneck Revolt and another one offer terrorist training manuals on their social media pages. They routinely, you know, say like this person lives here. Let's, you know, and winking and nod, implying that we're going to go, you know, do acts of violence against this person. And, you know, social media, these platforms do nothing about that. So they even have a hypocritical stance. I think you can make an easy standard. If this is a group that's promoting criminality and violence, like opening, like saying like shoot up this mall today, or like you need to grab your gun and start shooting cops or something like that, I think it's pretty easy standard that they can, you know, take a stand against that type of behavior. I mean, you can't just like, and Facebook has an obligation. If you're like live streaming you murdering somebody, they do have an obligation to take that down and report it to police.
I mean, would you say that you would just want the rules to be equally enforced on this in a non-hypocritical way? Would that satisfy you?
Yeah, I think they need clear rules. If this is about violence and it's about preventing, you know, violent groups from spreading an ideology that's going to support terrorism, something like ISIS, you know, these Redneck Revolt, even something like Atomwaffen, I could say you could see a standard for banning some of their rhetoric. Then yeah, I would say that is a clear standard, and that's something that we can abide by. But the thing is, they don't have a clear standard, and they just make up these rules on the fly. I mean, even with the Crowder banning, they're in less than 24 hours, they've totally shifted their position. They first said, we find that Crowder has not violated our rules. Less than 24 hours later, they say, actually, we are demonetizing him because we are finding him in violation of the rules. And what rules they are, he has a link selling T-shirts. I'm not sure what rule violation that is, but apparently that is. And these social media companies, they just make up the rules as they go along. They don't have clear regulations for what behavior you need to follow. Like people are just banned, and then they don't know what rules they violated.
This is like when Alex Jones was banned from Twitter, is that they were waiting on him for a long time, and then the thing that triggered them was when he got into an argument with Marco Rubio, and he was camped out and, you know, confronted him in his usual way, and then that triggered his banning from Twitter.
Actually, it wasn't Marco Rubio, the person that got him. It was the same day. It was because he harassed a CNN reporter, like I think a little bit after Marco Rubio. That's what Twitter cited him for being banned. And he didn't do it on the platform. He did it in real life. And it wasn't harassment. It was standard journalism. This is a public figure. He's asking him questions. And the guy just, you know, sat there and didn't want to answer Alex Jones's questions. And then he got banned for that. It was, once again, journalists showing that they have the power over big tech. But yeah, they just made up those rules as they went along. And the reason why Alex Jones got banned from all his social media platforms was for in 2013 promoting Sandy Hook conspiracy theories. Well, you know, if promoting fake news and conspiracy theories is the reason for banning, then a lot of other outlets would also, get banned. Like, why shouldn't Rolling Stone get banned for a rape on campus? That phony gang rape hoax they published in 2014. I mean, that story had a major effect on college campuses, and that even in University of Virginia, that led to all fraternities getting suspended, and it was a total lie. Why should we ban Infowars for the conspiracy theory or fake news that they promoted when Rolling Stone is still able to also use all these social media platforms? They don't have a good standard. That's the problem.
And it just seems to me like an issue of like, consumer protection. I'm not like a hardcore libertarian. I think that some of these things like, nutritional facts on labels, that's all stuff that we can accept. And it seems like it's a consumer protection issue where you're doing business with the company and you have an implicit and explicit agreement with them of some kind, for them to turn around and ban you. And when you ask them why am I banned, they don't give you a chance to talk to someone, to explain yourself, to defend your position. They just ban you.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't know, and we don't know how to avoid this behavior. They just ban people outright. And yeah, it is a problem with consumers. Consumer rights, we don't know the rules that we're violating, and they just keep making up new rules to satisfy journalists' demands. And even then, journalists are never satisfied. I mean, they demand more and more blood. And really, they just want everyone kicked off, from Fox News to every Trump family member. And maybe then they'll be happy. But up until then, they're going to keep demanding more people to be censored. And so I think tech censorship could be, I mean, if these companies, they definitely cannot allow everyone to be on their platforms. I mean, if somebody is clearly using their platform and being like, go out and kill this person right now, I'll pay you $500. Okay, they have to, there's an understanding that they probably should censor something like that. So they have to censor something. But they need to set clear rules. They need to follow these rules. And they need to not just be hypocritical of tolerating, Antifa, calls for violence, but then censoring, genteel, identitarians for, just expressing their political views. And that's one of the things. I mean, the most important thing that Trump can do right now is do something about big tech censorship, because this is only going to get worse. I mean, we're going to get to the point where if you voted for a Republican, you may not be able to have a bank account.
It seems like it's, people are really, they're much harder on the privacy stuff. That's the angle of attack that's being taken. I mean, even Elizabeth Warren and the Democrats, is that they can sort of get behind that with conservatives. But I don't know if we are going to be able to add in anything about this censorship into that bargain. Do you think that's seriously on the table?
With Republicans, the censorship, it's almost being forced on them by conservative media. I mean, it's one of the few good things conservative media has done, is that it has made Republicans care. The thing is Democrats want more censorship. Trump can do a few things through executive order and can apply pressure to them. There is maybe some bargain they can strike with Democrats. I mean, with privacy, I mean, a lot of Americans are not on Twitter, so they don't really understand censorship. And when they're on, they use, Amazon and Facebook and Instagram just for their own personal uses. But they definitely care about privacy. I mean, everyone is freaked out when they type in something in Google and then they get a million ads for it everywhere they go on the internet. And they're worried that their identity is being stolen and everything like that. So privacy concerns is something that touches all Americans. The censorship concern is almost something that's just regulated to Twitter. I mean, if you're politically involved and active, you definitely have an opinion about it. But for the average, NPC American, they don't really, it's definitely nowhere near their top of their concerns, but they definitely are concerned about the privacy and what these companies are using with their data. I mean, that's something that every American is concerned with. and comes in contact with every day they go on the internet, and they have personalized ads for things that they hadn't even searched for on Google. You know, it may have been something that just said on their telephone, and now they get a million ads for it.
It's always really, really creepy when that happens. I heard that Google is actually on Chrome, that they're disabling ad block support going forward.
That's horrible.
Not surprising. They need it. I mean, that hurts their bottom line. So I wouldn't be. They definitely would want to get rid of the ad blocks. I mean, most media sites are also getting rid of paid ad blockers too. So, yeah, that's the way of the world we live in.
On the note of censorship, you wrote a book, "No Campus for White Men." What was the leading up to that made you want to write that book?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. Leading up to that, I think in 2015, campus insanity really came to the fore in the national consciousness. I think there was the incident that inspired it was the University of Missouri protest over the campus. There was all these alleged racial incidents that led up to the football team going on strike to demand that their president, the university president, resigned, and then that university president resigned, and then they just like all these radicals took over campus. It was almost something that looked like a Black Power event from the 1960s or 70s, and it's something we hadn't really witnessed in several years in America. And I was very taken aback by this incident. I thought things were getting worse, and a lot of the commentary coming from conservatives was just stuck on, these snowflakes have helicopter parents and they just can't handle different ideas, and they're just snowflakes that need their pacifiers and such and like that. And at that time, I clearly perceived that no, this is definitely something racial. This is something that's motivated by anti-white animus. And
there was a really interesting story. I don't know if you heard about this one. It was a historically black college. And a local grocery store put out ads for, coupons. And the ads used white people on the cover of like the pamphlet, the little booklet that the coupons came in. Mm-hmm. And all the students took this as a very inappropriate like racial provocation on this part of this like local community supermarket. Like it's just like the stock art that they chose to like slap on this coupon.
Yeah. No, that was when I was writing the book, that was all the kind of microaggressions you see. It would just say that like, I remember one of the funnier complaints I had is that, I can't remember the university, but there was a university that was set to screen Stonewall, that panned movie about the Stonewall riots. And they were set to screen it, and trans activists were demanding that they don't do this because this movie promotes transphobic violence because there's no trans people in the movie, and thus they need to censor that. And there's several things due to that with like white. I think what happened with you saw campuses would shut down if they had like an "It's okay to be white" placard on the campus, even though that stuff was happening after I had written my book. There was the incident at Evergreen State College where they wanted to have the day without whites, and that led to full on the whole university was shut down for like a week, and they had patrolling like SJW gangs. It was like something from like a parody cartoon.
It was like the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So you had all these ridiculous things. I think I would like to go back and revise my book to, make it. I think I wrote it for a more kind of a skeptical conservative audience, and some of the arguments I was making were a little, cliche and kind of like almost Ben Shapiro tier, but I would like to go back and rework it. And it still has a relevant topic. I need to kind of update it and make it more relevant to now. It's very centered on what was happening in 2015 and 2016. And, things have changed a little bit differently on college campuses since then. But it's still a relevant issue. And I mean, this stuff is coming to the mainstream, and it's taking, I mean, I argue in this book, like people when they were interviewing me for the book, it's like, well, why should we really care about this? Because these kids, you know, they'll get in the real world, they'll get an office job, they'll learn that they can't like complain about microaggressions, which is total bullshit. I mean, all these, you know, human resources departments operate at on a level to watch out for racial and sexual microaggressions that you need a police and you can get you fired for. You know, if you use the wrong phrase around a minority, you could lose your job. And all these big corporations now have like racial sensitivity training and everything. So this like college nonsense is actually taking over the corporate world. I mean, every corporation now has to, you know, the Budweiser ads like celebrate your asexuality or being bisexual like cans. You know, this is something that like 10 years ago nobody would have ever dreamed of, and now it's a major marketing campaign by, you know, the largest beer company in the world.
Woke capital.
So let's get into a little bit about this, you know, it's okay to be white stuff. So the argument here is that I think that it's not so much that it's not okay to say it's okay to be white, but more the implication that white people can experience racism. That implication is racist in itself.
Yeah.
So do you think, I mean, that's like the common academic standard, which I think is taught in a lot of, especially lower tier schools. I think that at more elite colleges and universities, they actually don't break it down so simply, but especially at like a lot of state schools, I think, the students do go to the, you know, their 101 humanities courses, and this is like basically what they're told. And it's more at that level about just hammering in the mantra into them. Yeah.
I definitely experienced that at my shitty state school. So I remember it was almost like you said, in a sociology 101 class my freshman year, I had a professor who said that like whites can't experience racism because they have power and status in society, and racism can only be experienced by those without power. So that thus whites can't. Anti-white racism doesn't exist. So that was like kind of a red pilling moment for me.
Yeah.
Hearing that, and thank you, shitty state school education.
That's something that's
I would agree.
It's very built up around a narrative, that idea, a historical narrative about, you know, a lot of times anachronistic kind of ideas. You know, the ancient Greeks were white, so, you know, that's how their literature is judged. You know, all these diverse groups throughout history without a lot historically in common, like they wouldn't think about themselves as white or include themselves in this monolithic, you know, white patriarchy or whatever. They all get lumped together, and it's sort of like anti-diversity. It's like we're told that we're supposed to embrace diversity and embrace all these different perspectives, but then all of the white people throughout history who spoke thousands of different languages and existed in completely different time periods, they're all collapsed into like this single entity, and all their individuality is, you know, taken away from them.
Yeah, I think there's a point, but it's also reacting to kind of how European societies have built their heritage around it. I mean, the Greeks and the Romans, of course, you know, were the ancient peoples were all these different, but all these writers were also built up into the classical education that Anglo-American society used to be built up around. And it used to, you know, everyone used to read Homer and all this stuff, even and a variety of writers. And that was just, you know, something that everybody read. And that this was said that this is a heritage that you must learn, and it's built up, and the language and ideas and culture were influenced by that classical heritage that was taught through classical education, you know, 100 or so years ago. So yeah, there was coming from all these diverse peoples. I mean, there's nothing, I don't think, you know, ancient Germans, ancient Romans would have seen themselves as anything similar up until, I guess, Germans claimed citizenship after serving in the Roman army. Maybe the old Roman citizens had to see them as somewhat similar. But yeah, all these groups definitely did not see themselves as really unified up until Christendom gave them a sort of unity. But due to the heritage kind of imparted through the old education system and how American society used to see itself as, all the founders were reading the Greeks and the Romans and all these, and also stretched back their heritage to the ancient Anglo-Saxons who settled England. And so all that heritage has been mixed up into our old education. And now leftists see that as like, well, we have to reject that. And that is all dead white men, even though, of course, as you said, none of these people would have seen themselves as, especially in ancient times, as having any unifying traits. But in our age, it's all dead white men due to that unifying educational influence we had, that thus it's something that they have to reject, and it is something associated with the evil white civilization of at least Anglo-America that they have to tear down.
So, I mean, with this power and privilege stuff, is that it seems it assumes this very kind of, twisty, subtle sociological argument. And I feel like we're not allowed to question that argument, even though that should be an intellectually valid point to discuss and criticize.
What exact point?
The point that racism is power plus privilege, that, people are, exempt from being racist who have this history of being oppressed because their own racism fights back against the previous racism and cancels out all the racism. It's a very subtle kind of argument that doesn't figure into people how they think in a commonsensical way. But it's shielded so that we can't really talk about that intellectual aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, they could have a point. I mean, yeah, you could say that, like, if we're, let's say we're in the 1930s and, Jim Crow's still around, and, there is actual legitimate institutional racism. And then somebody complains that, like, this black day laborer who just got laid off because of, or his life is harmed by Jim Crow, that he hates white people. And then a white person's like, oh, this is just as bad as Jim Crow. There may be a point to saying, like, okay, that's a little bit lopsided, and there's definitely different types of racism. But in our day and age, that institutional racism doesn't exist. And really, the fact of the matter is you can spew anti-white racism and have prestigious jobs anywhere. But if you said that, blacks and whites have different average IQs, that would mean you would be unemployable and your reputation would be ruined and everything like that. So even by saying that only whites can be racist because of power and privilege, it's not shown by the consequences in our society. I mean, anti-white racism is rewarded. And, as you can see with the, who's the New York Times board editorial board member, the Asian woman?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't remember her name.
I can't believe I can't remember this right now. She was, funnily enough, in my statement to the Atlantic in September. I can't remember her name, but this is somebody who clearly has a pathological hatred of white people, as shown by her hundreds of tweets expressing this, yet she has one of the most prestigious jobs in journalism. And the New York Times didn't feel fit to say any consequences. And even in her apology, she said, oh, she's reacting against the very real white racism she feels on a daily basis. It was like, okay, maybe she has to deal with a few trolls, but if she ever dealt with a white racist in real life and knew that person's name, she could ruin that person's life forever. That person would get fired, their reputation would be ruined, news articles would be written about this person and how we shouldn't even allow this kind of person to exist. So if they really want to argue that, racism can only be built on power and privilege, then you'd almost say that the only racism that now exists in American society is anti-white racism. That's the only one encouraged by the establishment, the only one where you're rewarded by the establishment, and the only one where there are no real consequences for it. I mean, racism expressed by white people, or there's other examples. If you express, if an Indian expresses anti-black racism, then that person would also probably have negative consequences. But really, the only type of racism that's allowed in our society and encouraged and not punished is anti-white racism. So, the old sociology 101 argument that it must be built on power and privilege is undermined by that.
So what would be your idea of how standards should be applied here? In the same way that we were talking about these censorship standards. Do you think that people on the right should be allowed to be as racist as the people on the left? Do you think that the people on the left should suffer the same consequences? What's your opinion there?
I'm a supporter of free speech. If they're able to, well, it has to be defined by what is racism. Most of the people who are being censored, in Twitter, by social media, and are losing their jobs, say far less incendiary things than, I'm now starting to remember it. I think it's or the person who works for the New York Times editorial board. They're saying far less, the type of things they say are not nearly as bad as what people in the journalism industry are able to get away with in terms of spewing anti-white hatred. I would almost just say that if you should be able to say things that are controversial and be allowed to say them in a public settings and in mainstream forums, as long as you maintain a decorum. Yes, if you're citing racial slurs and being angry and just saying, these people suck, I hate them, I want to kill them all, okay, maybe you shouldn't have your spot on, CNN or something like that. But if you're able to offer a reasonable argument for saying, like, this is why multiracial societies don't exist, or these are the real racial differences between, different groups, and you're able to give a reasonable argument for that, I don't know why you should be allowed to have a platform. And most of these people who are getting censored are giving fairly reasonable arguments for their position.
It's incredible because it's most, I think of Jared, we spoke of Jared Taylor, who I think is the textbook example of that, and still managed to get deplatformed, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I think if you look at what Jared Taylor said and compared to, the average, non-white journalist says about white people, it's like they say very vicious things, it's like and they evince a very deep pathological hatred. Well, Jared's just talking about like statistics and data.
There's no resentment.
Sometimes it's almost boring. You might say, but apparently he's promoting violence with graphs. So,
and I think this goes to a point that I've been thinking about, is just how repressed we are as a society in this way. Is that we have the myth of the 1950s, the Eisenhower era, very repressed about sexuality and all these other things, and society needed to be liberated. But we're, in our own way, so very repressed when it comes to race, where it's not just that we want people to, question racial prejudices. It's sort of like we need to mind kill ourselves as a society to like bury every single last racial sentiment or racist sentiment, like as deeply as possible within the collective unconscious. And I think that even just that process, it sort of manifests as all these, racial fissures that we see, is that we're trying to repress ourselves, and then the right hand is doing it and the left hand doesn't know. It's like part of society is acting out this repression and the other part is repressing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's motivated by that we have to repress it because the alternative, the two options are repression, or somehow we turn into, evil neo-Nazi, horrible dictatorship if we don't repress it. So and the argument is that whites have to repress their thoughts and views on race in order for us to have a peaceful multiracial society, that if whites were allowed to openly express their views and opinions on race, that would lead to racial disharmony and conflict and all these terrible things, which I don't know if that's really the case. I mean, we've always, and yeah, if you have to look in the way, I mean, yes, you had violence in the past, and yes, you had terrible things, but people were still free to express it, and most of the people who were expressing this were not encouraging the violence or not responsible for that violence. And I think what it's leading to now is that any hint that you may be going into that territory makes you a person that must be excised from society. And whites were, I mean, the fact of the matter is that whites were the ones who founded and led America throughout its history, and now we can't even say that simple fact. But at the same time that whites have to repress their own views and opinions on race, we encourage every non-white group to say what they feel about white people every second of the day, which it's just a lopsided.
And that's the mechanism of repression, I feel, is that anti-white hatred, as you or other people would call it. That's the mechanism through which, we have this extreme repression of, racial sentiments to the point where it's like exploding out through the cracks because it can't be held within this, the heart of everything.
So what you're arguing is that we have the extreme repression of whites is due to the extreme expression of anti-white hatred. Yeah,
so it's these racial thoughts that get repressed, because the way that I feel about it is that you have white people and black people, both racist, clearly, and I think that a little bit of racism shared between them, it's no love lost. It's it's fine. But if someone says the N-word or something, like PewDiePie says the N-word, I mean, come on. And that's actually, a healthier way to look at it than saying that kind of racist expression by PewDiePie has to be like smashed into oblivion. Otherwise, what blacks are going to become oppressed again.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think to a lot of people, I mean, to the average conservative American, they can definitely see the hypocrisy of the expressions. I think there is a growing awareness that you're able to get away with anti-white racism to a radical extent, and in a way you can never get away with saying anything bad about non-whites. And that they realize that there are extreme, social pressures on the type of views and opinions you have. And I don't really know what kind of, safety valve there is for whites to, even express these ideas. And these ideas are going to become more common as time goes on among white Americans, because they're going to see that especially if every Democrat is running on the idea that whites should pay reparations to blacks. I think that's something more real for whites than, say, some university professor says, like, kill all white people. That's reparations is something they're going to experience through, greater taxes, and also is an idea that I think that's fundamentally alienating to a lot of people, because it's saying that I must pay for something that happened 150 years ago. And if you're somebody who's like a Polish immigrant or the descendant of Polish immigrants who came in like 1910, you're going to be pretty pissed that you're going to have to pay that price. So I think the extreme repression on one side and extreme expression on the other side is going to lead to more conflict and a worse situation in the future. I think right now they kind of feel that whites just will accept it and, just go along with the flow. They're like, oh, well, who cares what these people are saying? I'm at the golf course and I'm living my own life and whatever. But when it comes at the time where their own communities have to have Section 8 housing, they're having to pay a shit ton more in taxes to compensate for reparations, then I think they're going to see the price of that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my problem with reparations is, like, I feel like it sort of sells out the whole thing from the perspective of, like, Black Americans. It's like no matter what amount of reparations would be paid, the idea entails like a compromise where if we would pay reparations, like black people in America would have to stop saying anything about racism. But that's never going to happen, no matter like how much it's a stupid idea.
Yeah, and it's not going to really solve anything. I mean, it satisfies, and it satisfies a grievance for people who didn't experience it. I can understand maybe if there's like the argument for reparations for still living descendants. Like if you were put in an internment camp and that like hurt your job and your ability to have a life, then yes, I can understand the argument for the government paying you money. But for somebody, you getting, X amount of dollars or, some other form of compensation for something that happened 150 years ago, that's quite the different standard and quite the different experience. And that's not going to lead to more racial harmony or peace. Like it's, as you said, it's not going to satisfy or appease them. It's just going to demand they want more, especially if it doesn't solve the problems of, within black communities. And also other non-whites are going to demand reparations. They're going to be Native Americans, of course, going to want greater reparations. Hispanics will demand reparations. Indian Americans will find some way to get reparations. So all these groups are going to be demanding more and more money. And then blacks are also going to say that the reparations weren't enough. We need more radical solutions. So, yeah, but I think this is definitely something that we're going to experience in the next 10 years. I mean, it's very likely that the Democratic nominee for president will be somebody who supports reparations. And that's going to be something that's going to definitely change the way a lot of white Americans view race, and whether they feel that it's just something that they can escape from and ignore and just not worry about, into something that they actually have to worry about.
I don't know if it will go that far. I can't see any, especially in like 2020, I can't see any Democratic candidate.
It's hyper idealized and based completely in the symbolic and not in the real whatsoever.
Even if it is symbolic, just saying that people owe, I mean, that is like every boomer and Gen X person is going to be triggered by that idea. I mean, it's a very fundamentally American idea. Like Americans don't really like, paying taxes as is. And just like telling all these like boomers that they're going to have to give away their retirement in order to pay for reparations, even though maybe the policy doesn't necessarily cause that, but it's easy to say that that's what it's going to require, is going to seem people in anger. I don't think that's like going to lead to, some great revolution or anything. I mean, I just think it's going to lead to more awareness among average whites that, this is something that a multiracial society, a multiracial America, especially one where they're no longer the majority more, is going to be a worse life for them. I think more whites will realize that.
So, I mean, do you follow do you consider yourself a white nationalist in that sense? No. Is that you want?
I wouldn't say I'm a white nationalist, and it's become a negative term. But I think the best definition I ever heard of white nationalist was a book from a political science professor from George Hawley, who covered all these different elements of the American right that were outside the conservative movement. Is saying that a white nationalist believes that you need an entirely white society, that citizenship can only be reserved for white people. I don't think I would go to that. I would not go to that extreme extent. I think you can have a society with certain minority groups who are living there. They're living normally as citizens, or living normally as residents. They're not discriminated against by law. They're just able to do anything, but they remain minorities, and the society in general remains majority white. I would just say that just for the peace and prosperity of America, it has to remain, the nation has to remain majority white. Otherwise, I think it's going to lead to more racial conflict and a worse society, and especially a worse life for whites, and probably even for all people who are living there, to be quite honest.
So, I mean, you believe in a reasonable pluralistic society. Is that you think that, it can exist in a practical sense, but there has to be reasonable limits placed on it through policy?
Well, pluralistic in just that we can have, people you can have minority groups that are from different backgrounds, but I think as a nation, you have to emphasize that like there's a certain common national identity that is at least implicitly white. I think if an American national identity, like we can allow people to live here and they can work and raise families here, but you have to, America has to be open about the fact that it was founded by whites and largely made for people of European heritage, and that it must be kept majority that in order to survive and thrive. I mean, I guess pluralistic in that you could have like small communities who don't threaten who do not threaten the majority and do not want to challenge the majority for power. You could have that. Yeah, I guess you could say that's a reasonable pluralism.
So, I mean, do you support universal citizenship then, or it sounds like that you don't? I mean, would you? Are you saying that?
I mean, in my society, I would get rid of birthright citizenship. I think, and that would probably not be the case of universal citizenship. I mean, universal citizenship is too broad. You could probably there's probably ways to give citizenship if, like, say you serve in the military or you've been here for, your family's been here forever, then yeah, you would probably have citizenship. I mean, the citizenship question is going down a little bit different territory. I mean, on that matter, I would just say we need to get rid of birthright citizenship because it is privileging foreigners who just come to this country, have children, and then they don't really have any loyalty or ties to it. And it's all these Chinese tourists and Russian tourists who have children here specifically just so their kid has American citizenship, yet that kid has no ties of loyalty to our country. So that's...
And lots of countries don't have birthright citizenship like we do. So, I mean, this to me, it sounds like a reasonable thing. It doesn't sound like a hateful system. It sounds like...
It wouldn't be hateful at all. Yeah. I mean, but it's just emphasizing that it's harder to run a nation state if you have all these competing groups with it that have no unifying, that nothing really unites them except the desire to make money. And you have to have a unifying national identity. And I think if conservatives, if we lived in the ideal world, maybe a minority America where race didn't exist could work, but that's never going to happen. And race is going to exist, and it's only going to be heightened when it becomes a minority country. And whites are going to be imposed all these costs of living there, because it's not that whites are not going to be like a minority like everybody else. They're still going to be the hated group that's responsible for all the ills of non-whites, and that they must pay the price for that. And whites won't really have the political power anymore to assert their own interests. And I just don't think it's not going to be a peaceful, harmonious society. It's going to be racked with conflict, and it's not going to even really work well. So
I mean, this is my point of view, is that it really seems like a cultural problem. It seems like we have an inability to articulate a vision of what it means to be an American that is flexible enough to, incorporate everyone that we want to, but also, firm and rigid enough that it can withstand and, hold up to pressures and, fissures.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like we've really failed on a cultural level in order to articulate that on, in a spiritual way. So it's like, because I would believe that, that we can have a national identity that is not inherently racially based. But it has to be articulated as a framework that is, practicable. And I feel like that's what we really don't have at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And even, I think we did have, in years past, America was able to assert a, unifying national identity, but that was it was maybe not explicitly ethnocultural, but it was at least implicitly. America was once this great Protestant society, and the real American was saw as somebody who is at least culturally Protestant, likely from Northern Europe or somewhere from, and that was the identity. And that's of course was challenged in the early 20th century. And obviously we're never going to go back to the, only true Americans are WASP. I think even most people in the nationalist movement would not like that. But, we're not going to go back to that. But we kind of almost need to create a new national identity that maybe is not based in something like cultural Protestantism like it was in the 19th century. I mean, it was then the nationalism did understand the real American was like a Protestant, likely Anglo or maybe Scandinavian or a few other groups that have assimilated to the Anglo way. But we can't really go back to that. And really right now, the system doesn't offer a real unifying national identity. It's like, what is an American? It's like, you believe in liberty. A belief in a broad concept doesn't really create a real sense of purpose. I mean, when somebody's inspired to go fight and die something, they think about their home, they think about their family, they think about all the people that they see as they see themselves in, the people that they're sacrificing for. They're not just going to be sacrificing. It's like, I'm sacrificing myself for the right to, view as much porn as possible. There has to be a greater concept than like liberty. And even liberty is something that's not really believed by a lot of the left. I mean, they don't want free speech. They don't want freedom of religion. They definitely don't want the right to bear arms. So they don't really even care about these freedoms and liberties that we have. And they don't even share this common heroes and historical events we have. Like, remember the Alamo was a nationalist rallying cry. Now we would say the Mexicans were right to kill all the people at the Alamo, because they're evil white racists. So there's like these battles over heritage and symbols and icons that also factor into that. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a problem for right-wing nationalists to articulate a serious American national identity that include most people of European heritage. And something of that regard needs to be worked out. But the system and the establishment doesn't offer a real national identity. I think that's why people are turning to alternatives. It's because, a system built on, as conservatives love to jerk off about, a nation built on an idea is not one that's built to last.
And that's where I think that the people on the left, the journalists and the academics and people who are in sort of the professional literary sphere and people who write for the New Yorker and that sort of cultural industry, I feel like they're the ones who sort of really let us down because they want a more pluralistic, inclusive society, but they cannot articulate a vision of what that means beyond it's built around being oppressed minorities who are fighting back against white people or some sort of patriarchal system or whatever.
Yeah. And I don't even think it's really pluralistic because they don't allow, they really don't allow differences. I mean, if you're an evangelical Christian who emphasizes that gay marriage is wrong, you're excluded from membership in this wonderful pluralistic society. If there's all these different types of groups that don't follow along. And even the kind of monoculture, it's more of a monoculture than a pluralism because all these non-whites come together and their shared identity is they're not white and they view white people as the enemy that must be taken down a notch. And everything that all the other minority groups that were held back by Western civilization can also join in. And we're going to celebrate this wonderfully tolerant society. But this tolerant society, it's not necessarily pluralistic. If you view gay pride parades as wrong, you're not welcome. You have to emphatically agree that gay pride parades are wonderful and moral. you have to agree that trans women are women. You can't say they're not women. I mean, so it's not really a pluralistic society. It's not really people who are allowed to think differently. You have to affirmatively accept all of these things that they push. Otherwise, you're designated to be for exclusion. And they say it's pluralistic, but it's not really pluralistic. It's a new monoculture that is also undefined, but it knows what is not allowed and who are its enemies. It doesn't really know what it's necessarily for, except for, these pet fad political issues of the day, such as trans rights or something like that. But it doesn't really have a positive affirmative vision of what it's for, but it does have a vision for what it's against and what it doesn't tolerate.
Yeah, so it's not constructive. I mean, we have all these ideas of progress and we're going to build the future and build a better America, but there's no positive or constructive dimension to this progressive project.
Yeah.
It's entirely negative. And, I might even like it more. I might agree with it if it had something to offer, but it doesn't. So all we have is these, very, scattershot attempts on the right to perform that function for society. And they can't even do it because they're under this intense scrutiny and pressure from the people who are supposed to be providing this identity to not provide an identity.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing they do offer is the right to pursue pleasure in whatever way possible. I mean, that's the only thing it really offers, is that it offers you the ability to binge watch as much TV as you want, to consume as much porn as you want, to have as much sex as you want if you can obtain it. But even then, there's clearly limits to that. I mean, I think one of the things about the incel movement that makes it, so many people, there's so many, upset incels that they are denied the one thing that this society is supposed to give them, pleasure and fulfillment, and that they can't pursue that either usually because of their own issues. But the thing that the incel movement will grow is because they're denied the one thing that society tells them that they can have, and that's pleasure. And if they can't have that, then that's a violation of civil rights. So people laugh at it, but the thing is that the only thing, it doesn't really offer us a sense of purpose or a real sense of identity or, roots or anything like that, but it is supposed to offer us pleasure. And yet the one thing, there are all these people who are denied that, and they're going to demand it. I mean, the incel movement is like very humorous in a lot of ways, but this is something that's going to be growing. I mean,
it's an incredibly real take.
Factors. But also, that's also one of the motivating factors for a lot of feminists. I mean, feminists feel unfulfilled by a variety of reasons, and that they demand society, satisfy them. If guys are dumping them because are not messaging them on Twitter or Tinder because they're too fat, then that's a civil rights issue that must be corrected. And so a lot of these new civil rights issues are dependent on the demand for access to pleasure. So that's something that we're going to see more of.
So what do you think? Because on the right we have all the boomers, and they're from a time when there was more of a unified idea of Americanism and what it means, and that was mostly just based around you have to become a paperboy when you're a kid, and work hard, Timmy, like that sort of stuff. But it's clear that also that's too anachronistic for it to be revived.
Yeah.
And I don't know what is sort of the successor to that can be.
I think it's just going to accelerate faster downhill. I think that's I might be black-pilled, but
in some ways, I mean, even in that time, in the boomer thing in our society did offer people, if you did bring up a good point, KantBot, is that all of these people if you worked real hard and you played by the rules, then you would have a successful life. You'd have a hot wife and a happy family and a sweet ass retirement package and all these things if you did everything right. But that's not even on offer for millennials and Gen Z. I mean, you do everything right and you play by the rules and you have like 200K in student loan debt and you can't even have you have a job that can't even pay for you to have a family.
You'll never own a house.
And your girlfriend is demanding you enter a polyamorous relationship. That's maybe a little bit too black, but no, it's young people today do not have the same opportunities that boomers and Gen Xers had, and that they benefited off of all the prosperity that we had in the post-war years. That now it's changing in the gig economy. You don't even have a stable income anymore, and so we do have to articulate an identity. I mean, clearly, I mean, for me and other people who are identitarians or nationalists or however they argue, it does have to be something that's based around European heritage and a shared heritage that we have in order to rally people around and have an identity built around that. Now, the clear amplifications of that and everything, the specifics, that may not be worked out yet, but people have to be offered an identity that's not necessarily tied to materialism, to the ability to have a good income, to the ability to have as much pleasure as you possible, because those things clearly don't work anymore. You have to have something that people are going to live and die for and gives meaning to their lives and roots them in something more meaningful than, the daily existence of Pornhub and, video games or something like that. And that's the job of any right-wing movement, is to offer that identity and to rally Americans around that and to reform the system to make it more peaceful and harmonious.
So you would be against universal basic income?
Philosophically, I don't like it, but it's maybe for politically pragmatic reasons. Maybe I might support it, but I mean, in some ways I don't like universal basic income. I mean, It just gives you a check for doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe my inner boomer comes out and is like, these goddamn kids need to find a job or something. I just, I mean, I like the idea of neat bucks when, Yang was cool and we all had a fun time memeing with him.
With the pink
I mean,
hat.
I wasn't horrified by it, but I mean, maybe for pragmatic reasons, but like philosophically, or not really philosophically, just deep personal reasons, I don't like it.
Stirs you the wrong way. Yeah.
So, I mean, we've gone a little over. We were going to go for an hour. We're at 90 minutes now. So I guess we should sort of wrap it up here.
Yeah.
I want to thank you a lot, Scott, for talking to us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. This was fun. Hopefully I didn't sound too much like an idiot.
No, very enjoyable.
There's not like 8 right-wing watch articles about this. Like, it's like Scott encourages everyone to say racial slurs or something like that.
Okay. Do you have a website, or you want to promote your Twitter account? Anything?
Yeah, just on my Twitter. I'm doing mainly things. Not necessarily in the same conservative media game. Otherwise, promoting that. But I still have my voice on Twitter, so just follow me at Scott M. Greer if you don't already. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. So you should follow me.
Okay, hopefully we can talk again on a future episode. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And have a nice night, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Same to you. Thank you.